Hey guys, this is DFD, aka Dark Frozen Depths, back with another Kamihime project video. Now, this is one that I usually don't do because the a general amount of info is pretty much found in game for these, but I feel like I need to because the um the global set had some translation issues and all that. They practically rushed that previous patch, so you wouldn't even know the new info for some of the stuff on this. But this is a Tower of Malice, not really a guide video, but more like a hint one, because I don't necessarily know who has what teams or whatever. There's still the limitations for Tower and all that. For those that don't know what Tower is, it's basically a special event that's held like every 2 months, I do believe, where you keep going through different floors of the tower. You have to constantly switch out your teams because there's a limited number of uses for each character, except for your soul. So all your Kamihime is going to come into play for this one, and you're generally advised to go towards the advantage element so you can get the most medals you can. You don't necessarily have to, as long as you can get your 10,000 medals somehow, some way, in order to get the SSR break limit set. That's all that really matters, because that's the main priority of your annoying tower, to get those break limit sets to get your weapons stronger. Now, I'm going to skip quite a bit of this because there's so much easy stuff in Tower at this point in the game, especially if you're a veteran player. But I will still go over some key things about different floors and whatnot too. But I will say this out the gate: if you have a weapon grid that has 60% assault and nothing else but defender after that, you are still capable of clearing the first 15 floors. So you should be able to at least get your 10,000 medals. Like, they give you plenty of keys to go that far. So it all depends on how much you sip and go advantage element, of course, and there is a turn bonus thing where the faster you clear the floor, the more extra medals you get. But just the base medals alone, I think you need to clear about floor 15 or 16 or so, and that's with all the missions, and you're good enough for that. But starting off too, they also reworked the whole system for this because they've added the floors 21 to 25. So we have new stat ratings and all that too. I'll mention that. But I'll generally go over some key things about the different floors and all that too. So keep that in mind. Starting off, floor 1, basic stuff. No enemy has more than 25,000 HP. The middle enemy is going to do the most towards your team, but it is such easy content that even day 1 players should be able to clear the first 5 floors. I'm not even kidding on that. Just go into Epic Quest and get your stuff, or even grind up in order to be able to do ultimate raids, and you should be able to clear the first 5 floors very, very easily. But other things to mention: second floor, the Mimic actually can do more to you. It's like an AoE type of thing it can do. Third floor, that middle enemy, the Golem, has the most HP, but the first enemy, the Gargoyle, has the additional actions. Fourth floor is where everything starts having more additional actions pretty frequently, so keep that in mind. It's also the first time you have multiple waves of enemies. There is a boss wave that has 350,000 HP, not million. But yeah, the boss has 350,000 HP. This is a point where you start having, like, I do believe it's standard Advent level HP for enemies, but the boss is expert level HP for 5th floor. So 5th floor is the first time you fight this Namia, and this is easily the hardest enemy in Tower, but it depends on the floor you're at. So keep that in mind. But it's definitely the point where like every 5th floor is really ramps up in difficulty. My suggestion for the first 5 floors: get a soul that can knock all these enemies off at once. Solomon does it, Medea does it, Paracelsus can do it too, Caspar, it depends, but get a soul that can knock off multiple enemies at once, or get Kamihime that can do that. And try to keep them at R rarity, because I would easily say the first 10 floors can be done with R rarity Kamihime. So there's that. Now, 4-6 is where things start picking up and enemies have more HP. If you don't have a B class soul, then you're probably going to want one at this point. But another set's of 2 waves of enemies, but the second wave has a total of 1.4 million HP, so that's where you're starting to get into 7 digits of HP per floor, at the very least. So keep that in mind. 7th floor is the first time an enemy has 7 digits of HP, which happens to be the boss. It's also the first time you see 3 waves of enemies instead of 2. And watch out for the boss when his HP starts getting low, because then it'll start hitting everybody on the team and a lot more frequently. So there's that. 8th floor, same thing. You're going to start seeing like bosses with like 7 digits of HP. But this is also the first time an enemy has a noticeable amount of debuff resistance, so keep that in mind for this boss. And ultimate level debuff resistance is, I would say, about the point where the old Guardian raids had it, if anybody remembers that. But for those that don't know, it's like you start missing a very noticeable amount of debuffs at expert and ultimate level resistance. So that said, I would say you'd miss about maybe 20 to 30% of your debuffs, at least. So there's that. And that's with elemental advantage, so keep that in mind. Now, 9th floor, you have an enemy with 3 million HP. This is the point where you might actually start struggling with your Medea usage if you're not careful. But, and Solomon definitely would struggle at this point. So you may want to consider bringing, the Battlefield Eidolons that can do a lot of damage in one hit. If there's an SSR version of them, they will do 1 million damage per use. And you can use them out the gate, so it's like they have no cooldown on their summons, but you can only summon them once per fight. So if you've racked up quite a few of them, this is probably the point where you can start breaking them out and start spamming them. Now, 10th floor, you have quite a bit to go through because there's 2 waves of enemies beforehand. And they're starting to do a lot of different stuff. The one on the second wave that has like 1 orb will constantly try to get in your way. So you may want to kill it first. And then the boss itself, this is the first time you start seeing restraint debuff. And what that does is like a very, very strong paralysis. You just can't do anything when it lands. So be careful if you happen to get smacked with its raging overdrive, because that's when you'll start seeing restraint. It's a weak restraint, but it'll be stronger the more times you face that boss. But this is the second time you see the dysnomias. Like, they'll pop up every 5 floors, and this is the 10th floor. Speaking of which, 11th floor, it starts ramping up in difficulty. Those that haven't finished their ultimate raid run, they may start struggling at this point, so keep that in mind. Speaking of which, there's ultimate level resistance on both enemies of floor 11, so you may not want to rely on your debuffs. But if you are trying to debuff, make sure to up your chances of it as much as possible. You should be using elemental advantage for the tower anyways, otherwise you miss a lot of medals. But there's also other ways to up your chances of debuffing, like lowering the enemy's elemental resistance towards you, increasing your own elemental attack through buffs, having debuff changes for the buffs like Vicissitudes of Fortune and all that type of stuff. There's ways to manipulate your chances, so if you are reliant on debuffs, that's when you really need to start breaking it out, because ultimate level resistance can catch you off guard. Enemies are also starting to have a very noticeable amount of HP at this point too, even for veterans, so you may not kill them in one hit, so it might take multiple hits in order to do it. So keep that in mind. Now, 412, that's when you start facing enemies that have 7 digits of HP just as normal mobs, not just bosses. So again, if you're struggling, break out the Battlefield Eidolons, but the boss itself is also a little bit tricky because of the fact that it can normal attack quite often. So if you are one of those players that haven't really gotten that far in the game and you're struggling a bit, just bring some combo rate down for this floor. But also, floor 11 plus is probably the point where you definitely need to start breaking out your SR characters. Try to avoid using your SSR characters until there's nothing left for them, because they easily are some of the most powerful characters you'll have for the element, and you will need them for the latest floors you can reach. Now, floor 13, you have a total of over 10 million HP to try and burn through. So this could be a bit of a longer fight. Usually with the boss type of stuff, people don't go for Medea and they instead go for Yori. Or the weaker version would be Shingen. So consider bursting down these enemies. Especially considering that you will get hit with an ability seal from the boss. So there's that. 414, that's the first time you see an enemy with 10 million HP or more. So that said, bursting definitely is going to help you out. However, it can counter you when it's raging and 5 people burst. So if it does survive, expect to get counter nuked. So be careful of that. Now, floor 15 is a point where people tend to struggle quite a bit early on, because the boss starts doing quite a lot of restraint. It will do it for every single overdrive it has. And on top of that, it's got 2 triggers that's based off of HP, where if any of your characters are restrained, it will hit them even harder. So keep that in mind. It also has Tower Ruler level resistance. This is the highest level of resistance you will find in the game. Meaning you should not rely on debuffs at all unless they are guaranteed to land, like taking a Cerberus in your sub slot or something like that. And then on top of that too, enemies all have 7 digits of HP or more, so this is where your turn bonus might actually suffer. Mine tends to suffer unless I'm like on one of my stronger elements, like say fire or light. But this is a wind tower, and they're not as good as my other elements, so even I would struggle with the turn bonus at this point. Just try to do your best for that one if you are going after turn bonus. But keep in mind that the boss definitely needs to be bursted down. So if you can get a full burst ready by then, you should be good to go. You can still get the best turn bonus if you have a very strong ability team, though. So there's that. But Tower Ruler level, if anybody remembers the old version of Ophiel and the Wind Ragnarok raids, this boss has more resistance than those enemies. So keep that in mind. I would easily say that less than 10% of your debuffs are going to land. So don't even try it. And if that wasn't bad enough, floor 16 is where things really, really ramp up. A lot of people, even some veterans, tend to struggle at this point. This is one of the floors that tend to kill off a lot of your keys. So the first boss has almost 10 million HP. The second boss has 15 million. And they both have a low orb count, so like 2, even 1 orb. On top of that, they have Ragnarok level resistance. I mentioned the old version of Ophiel and Wind Ragnarok because they just recently got their nerf. But they had some very, very strong resistance, and these bosses have the same amount of resistance. So again, don't try to rely on debuffs. Try to knock them down with raw damage. It's also best to try and get your burst off as quickly as possible, because while you can delay it for the first enemy, because you just have to be able to clear off the debuffs it puts on you, the second enemy is going to nuke you hard and lower your defenses, so you need to kill it as fast as possible. And remember that for 416, because unfortunately they come back even worse on 421. But 417, they give you a little bit of a break on the debuff resistance, but you still have a strong boss at the end with 15 million HP. So keep that in mind. Enemies have low orb counts that aren't the boss, like 2 or less, so you do have to be careful with that. The boss has beginner level resistance, meaning it's like the lowest in the game, so feel free to go crazy with debuffs on here. But it also can up its own attack and defense, so you may want to have some little removal for that. And it will stay until you get rid of it too, so keep that in mind. It can also debuff you, so be careful of that. Now, floor 18. There's always some weird little gimmick with floor 18, is also ends up being another key killer. The boss has ultimate level resistance, so debuffs may struggle against it. But the gimmick with this 418, the first enemy, if no one has lightning resistance down, it will spam its trigger. So don't even try to get rid of it. It also has a little delirium thing to itself that basically counts as a buff. Don't try to remove it either. So generally, you want to keep the elemental resistance debuff on at least one of your characters, and then try to make sure that it keeps the delirium on itself. But 12 million HP is quite a bit to go through. If you haven't been getting your bursts prepared or whatnot with your weapon grid, you may not even kill that in one shot. And then the boss itself has 18 million and then more resistance. Its main thing is zombie, which if you heal with zombie, you will take damage instead of getting healed. On top of that, if somebody has zombie, it's going to do its trigger. So be very, very careful of that. But when it does its raging overdrive, it will put zombie and regen on your team. So if you have element block, you'll get free healing. So keep that in mind. And if you somehow have not been using your SSR characters by now, this is probably a good point to start using some of them. So keep that in mind. Now, 419 is kind of gimmicky as well, but just not as much as the previous floors. But enemies are starting to have like 2-3 million HP as normal mobs. If anybody remembers the old version of Labyrinth where you had to constantly go through floors like a good 200 or so, that's how much enemies would probably ramp up to, about 2 million HP, so they generally have more than that. And the boss itself, expert level resistance is just not as strong as the previous floor, but it can catch you off guard. It will maximize its orbs multiple times in a fight, so be prepared for some overdrives to come out of nowhere. And then on top of that too, if you burst, it's going to counter you, so make sure that when you burst it, you can basically kill it, or you have some defenses up. Floor 20, the first 3 enemies, don't worry too much about them, but if you are trying to take the least amount of damage from the first wave, try to kill the middle enemy first because it has 1 orb. But the 420 boss definitely can give you a lot of issues with that one. It has a damage over time debuff, but it also still has that restraint. It also has some very, very serious triggers here. There's quite a few of them that you do have to worry about. There's some HP triggers that start off when it's like at half HP. Then on top of that too, whenever one character is restrained, it's going to nuke everybody. So make sure that restraint is kept off of you so you don't get double tapped. Now, it also has 2 orbs, so you'll have to be careful of that. It has Ragnarok level resistance, so don't worry about debuffing it. So there's that as well. But it does have 17 million HP, so keep that in mind. But if that wasn't enough, they've added floors 21 plus. Now, my suggestion, anybody that wants to take on these floors, you definitely need to be very, very well prepared. I wouldn't even try 21 plus with anything less than SSR characters. And on top of that, it's probably good if you have malicious raid grinding done, so you can actually handle these quite well. Each of these floors could easily feel like a heroic run, regardless of the HP. They're just that much of a gimmick, and then it's really rough on a lot of these enemy triggers, so I'm going to go through each and every single floor from this point on. Starting with floor 21, first enemy is going to keep trying to nuke you whenever it lands a charge from its overdrive, so you definitely don't want it to double tap you. So get some good protection or whatever, or simply try to knock it down pretty quickly. It does have 15 million HP, so it can get one-shotted with a full burst that has like enough exceed to hit the 2 million burst caps. So keep that in mind. The second one, however, you are not killing in one full burst unless you really, really built up your grid, so keep that in mind. Because it now has 30 million HP, like 416. In fact, these are the same two enemies from 416, but it has one orb, so it's going to frequently nuke you. The only difference between this and 416 is the fact that you're going to get hit harder, but it also has lower debuff resistance, so definitely rely on your debuffs to try and lower that damage as much as possible. Because at half HP, and on top of that, whenever it nukes you with its overdrive, like full orbs, it's going to constantly stack damage increase buffs on itself. You want to kill this thing as fast as possible before the damage gets out of hand. It already hits hard, but it's just going to keep hitting harder. And I don't know if you can remove it or not, but even if you do, it's just going to come back frequently. So your best bet is just to try and damage race it. Try to kill it as quickly as possible. Use debuffs, use rapid fire bursts. If you have North Star, that's going to be helpful as well. Try to kill it as quickly as possible. 422. Enemies are starting to have quite a lot of HP for just even normal mobs. So if 421 didn't kill your turn bonus, 422 is definitely going to start trying to do it. You need some very, very strong AoE nukes in order to try and maintain a very good turn bonus. But with the first three enemies, they love buffing and recovering while one of them nukes. The one that will nuke you is the one that has the most orbs. They all have 4.5 million HP. You can try to get rid of the healer in the middle first, or the defense buffer, but if you really want to take the least amount of damage, get rid of the first enemy with the 4 orbs. They will constantly try to deal heavy damage to you. Now, second wave of that 4, both enemies have 5 million HP. And if both of them are alive, their overdrives will go off twice. So be very, very careful with that one. You have to kill one of them as quickly as possible. Choose which one you feel like will be the least issue and just get rid of them. Now, the boss itself, be careful of this one because it can do a lot of damage to you, but it's going to keep trying to put its mode gauge up. So the raging is definitely the more dangerous one, because I do believe the raging is AoE and the normal isn't. Has beginner level resistance, so a lot of debuffs will land. Try to keep the damage off you as much as possible, and if it is trying to rage itself, then just let it rage, but then try to take down its rage bar. So that's the best way to handle that one. 423 is another gauntlet of bosses. Only this time you have 25 million for the first one, 50 million for the second one. And you're definitely going to want some debuff resistance on this fight because of the fact that you're going to get spammed with a lot of debuffs. There's Curse, there's Venom, there's Corruption. There's a lot of debuffs on you. You definitely want to have a lot of cleanses, a lot of debuffs, resistance, a lot of debuff removal. It's going to put a lot of it on you. And the big thing with Curse from the first boss is the fact that it will prevent healing. It won't damage you like Zombie, but it prevents healing, so be careful of that one. But it's 3 orbs on the first boss. The second boss has 2 orbs. Try to knock them down as quickly as you can, because if you're not really prepared, each one will take at least 2 bursts in order to knock down. So be careful with that one. So you're going to need 2 full bursts at the very least for even just the first one. Now, 424, they give you a slight break, but the enemies still shouldn't be underestimated because they can still put debuffs on you, and then they're packing quite a bit of HP, 7.5 million just for the first wave of enemies, and then 10 million for the second wave. So each enemy's really, really starting to pack a lot of HP. They have low orb counts too, so you can relax a bit, but don't relax too much, if you can understand that. Now, the boss is where you definitely want to unload. 75 million HP is a lot. For comparison, it is like the Ragnarok Plus from the raid events, like the one that's ongoing at the time of this video. you're basically doing a Ragnarok Plus fight on your own just for the third wave. And its main thing is putting diffusion on itself, which is generally making its attacks go AoE. It's going to constantly keep putting that on itself too, so don't try to remove it. However, it will lower its own triple attack rate whenever it takes 13 normal attacks. It can try to lower yours though, so be careful with that. But it will lower its own triple attack rate when it gets hit with 13 normal attacks. So Paracelsus users might be able to get something good out of this, or just anybody that has a good combo rate for their team. So keep that in mind. Anybody that's done malicious raids, you definitely want to break out your technical weapons for the boss if you're going that route. And now for the big one, 425. This is going to be the biggest gauntlet because it has the most HP period point blank out of the entire thing. The normal enemies have 12 million to 15 million HP. The one in the middle has 12 million, so you can kill it faster. But they're all going to start nuking you quite a bit. So you definitely want to prepare yourself by having a decent amount of protection. But that's a grand total of almost 45 million HP to go through just for the first wave. And if that wasn't enough, you have to fight the Dysnomia again as a boss. 150 million HP. Thanks to the recent nerf to the Guardian raids, that is more HP than they have. That was like half the HP of the Och raid. So keep that in mind. It's going to be a long fight. Throw turn bonus out the window and just not even care at this point. And then on top of that, it's going to spam restraint. It is very dangerous to have restraint on this more than any other version of the fight because both overdrives will put restraint. If one person has restraint, you're going to get nuked. If all 5 characters have restraint, it's going to do insane damage to the entire team. It says extreme level damage. And at this point, the enemy's attack power is quite noticeable. Just even normal attacks will start dealing 5,000 damage to characters, even with elemental advantage and full attack down, the 50% attack down. So you definitely need some defense buffs, you definitely need some cuts. Use whatever you can in order to lower that damage. If everybody has restraint, you are going to get very harshly punished. So if that does happen, you may want to save your Kaiser for that. Definitely have a Kaiser for this fight, or Genbu, or whatever. So that's the big thing about that. Try to keep restraint off yourself as much as possible. You definitely need to have some debuff protection for that. And debuff the boss itself for sure. Definitely try to break out as much as you can for that. Now, it also has 2 orbs, so it's going to be pretty frequent with the overdrives, so be very careful when it's raging. And the only other thing I can give you for advice too is to simply try to be careful when it hits half HP, because its normal attacks will start doing restraint because of a special buff it puts on itself, and you can't remove it. So when it hits half HP, you definitely have to be very careful with that restraint, because it's not just a burst that it does that will put restraint on you. But for anybody that's also wondering too about the different rating systems, they added Ragnarok Plus and Malicious to the rating systems, I do believe. So you can see it for HP, but not for the other stats. It doesn't go past Tower Ruler for the debuff resistance. And as for the level of attack power, it's the same case. It doesn't go past Tower Ruler. Although it might be unmeasurable for 421, I'm not exactly sure. But you generally see how high the HP can start ramping up. Again, every 5 floors is like a difficulty jump, so be very careful of that one. If you do not have your S-Class souls by 421, you are really going to suffer. So that's what I have to say for that. As for the missions and the medal bonus, for those that don't know, the missions always want you to have 5 surviving characters, meaning if you lose more than 3 people on your team, you failed that mission. They also want elemental advantage, so in this case it's wind. but you still get medals just for clearing. You get more medals for clearing it from floor 11 onward, but the bulk of the medals is going to be for having fast surviving characters and for having wind element only. So, for this tower, definitely be careful of that one. But if you do happen to run out of wind characters, it's best to use them all in the earlier floors and then switch to your best team later on. That way you're going off element with your best teams on the harder floors. But keep in mind that off element 421 plus is going to be very, very, very difficult. Even I won't have too much confidence in my light team on those floors, because enemies will hit you very, very hard. So I'm going to try and have wind as much as possible. I always try to record tower videos for those that don't know, so keep that in mind. Then on top of that too, turn bonus, you have to kill enemies like the entire floor in a single turn, or without even hitting the attack button, if you want the best turn bonus. It's going to decrease every single every 2 turns after that, roughly. So the longer you take, the worse your turn bonus gets. If you take more than 19 turns, you don't get a turn bonus. Don't expect a turn bonus from 421 plus. Like, you might get one of the later ones, but don't go in there with turn bonus in mind. If you want to have your easiest time with tower, I would even say 420 plus. Just don't even worry about turn bonus. Sometimes it might even be 416 plus, depending on the characters. I know I'm not going to care about it by the time I hit the 15th floor. So, that said, if you're really trying to go for turn bonus, you have to somehow kill every single floor in one single turn. That's not happening unless you have a whale level grid. Don't even try it unless you have a whale level wind grid. And I'm also talking about using a lucent weapon too, so you can get the increased damage as well. So that said, turn bonus, the further you go, don't even worry about it. Also, you don't get any elixirs. If you lose on one floor, you can go back to where you left off, but you won't be able to see all the floors in the tower. Each key is there for each floor. So, if you want to make it to 425, you cannot have a team wipe at all. So, keep that in mind. Now, they also gave hints here too, but I also gave my own takes on all of that type of stuff too. There's a huge list of Kamihime that's also pretty recommended for all this different types of stuff and what type of elements they have, and like if they're like defense or tricky or healer or whatnot. This is for when it used to have the missions where you needed specific types. Don't worry about it, but these are a lot of Kamihime that's very useful for this, in my opinion. And it's not just the SSRs, because again, you can only use a character a limited number of times. It's 3 times before you can't use them for the rest of the tower. So, plan that out carefully. If I remember correctly, you need at least, I think, upwards to about 36 or maybe 40 wind characters if you want to go through the entire tower with nothing but wind characters. So, and still clear all the missions. So keep that in mind. There's a lot of different debuff frames they have for some of these characters too, if you pay attention to what you're using. The ones that aren't wind element though come from generally come from Idolans. So keep that in mind. But the stuff listed in black here instead of green come from souls, so they're quite flexible, just make them wind. But the other thing I can mention too, if you caught a glance of it, you get 14,000 medals from clearing every single mission alone. So keep that in mind. The turn bonus adds another 2,500 if you somehow do one turn on every single floor or less. So if there is some serious super whale out there that's got like some overpowered grid, that got every single multiplier they can get their hands on, along with like a lucent weapon, some overpowered crap, then maybe, just maybe, you might get that 16,500 medals, but I don't think it's going to happen for almost everybody. So keep that in mind. But anyways, that's all for this. This has been a long video, but again, it's going to be a long video. Just look at all this mess, and it would have been easily 2 to 3 times longer if I went through every single little bit of detail, because I really don't need to for a lot of these easier floors. I really didn't have to until at least maybe floor 11, but I did it anyway. But, the only other thing, too, I forgot to mention as well, you also have to sometimes watch out for when you use certain abilities. The 410 enemy, if you use a blue ability, it's going to nuke you. So, be careful with that one. But, thankfully, they didn't have it for the higher floors. They tend to have it for 418 for a couple of towers, where if you use, like, a red ability or a yellow ability, you get countered. They didn't have it this time. But, you still got to be careful with that mess. So, again, that's all for this. Rewatch this video, and I'll even leave a link to this exact wiki, but you're going to need Google Translate if you want to read it yourself. But just rewatch the video or use the link or whatever that I post in the comment if you want to look through this again, because it's hard to keep track of this mess for like 25 different floors. Believe me, I have this wiki pulled up every time I run tower. So if it seems like I'm hesitating when I'm switching teams, that's why. But anyways, that's all for this. More of this will come soon, and take care.